Hello everyone, this is Dr. Hatami. In this video, we're going to have a quick review of the appendicular skeleton. So if you remember, when we talked about this skeleton, we said we have 206 bones in adult skeleton, which the part is going to make the main of the body, which is the skull, the rib cage, and vertebral column is called axial skeleton. And the part that it would be the upper limb, the lower limb, and the bones connecting our upper limb and lower limb to the axial skeleton, it would be our appendicular skeleton. So the appendicular skeleton consists of the bones within the pectoral girdle, which means the bones is going to connect our upper limb to the axial skeleton, and then pelvic girdle, which are the bones connecting our lower limb to the axial skeleton. And we have the bones of upper limb and the bones of the lower limb. So here we are going to talk about the bones making our appendicular skeleton. Let's start with the pectoral girdle or shoulder girdle, which means the bone connecting our upper limb to the axial skeleton, which in this part we have these two bones, scapula or shoulder bone that you can see here would be found in the back of the body as like a triangular shaped bone, and clavicle, which is like a S-shaped bone that you can find on anterior view of your body. So these two bones connecting together through the acromioclavicular joint that you can see here. And then there is a bone marking related to the scapula, which is called glenoid cavity. So if I want to show you the glenoid cavity, you can see something like a shallow cup-shaped structure here, which then it would be articulated with the bone of the arm, which is called humerus. So the glenoid cavity articulates with the head of humerus, and together they're gonna make glenohumeral joint, which means our shoulder joint. Our shoulder joint is the most movable joint in our body, which is very mobile, and obviously it's less stable. And then there is like possibility that it can be dislocated. So now let's talk about the clavicula a little bit. So as you can see here in this picture, this green color is showing the clavicle, which the clavicle would be articulated medially with the sternum here. Then we are going to have our sternoclavicular joint, which means the articulation between sternum and clavicle. And then laterally, as I mentioned, would be articulated with the scapula. And here we have our acromioclavicular joint. So this is actually a bone that you can see it from surface, you can touch it, and the break in this bone is one of the most commonly fractured bone in our body. And there is a fun fact about the clavicle, which is in many cultures, the visible clavicles are linked with elegance, delicacy, and like beauty. So then let's talk about the bones of our upper limb. So in our upper limbs, we can actually divide our upper limb to the arm region or upper arm, then forearm region, and hand. So as you can see, we have only one bone in arm, 2 bones in forearm, and we have 27 bones in our hand. It's interesting, right? So in upper arm or in the arm region, this long bone is called humerus. So we have humerus bone, the only long bone in our arm. Then in forearm, we have these 2 bones, radius and ulna, which the radius is the lateral one. So here the lateral bone in the forearm is called radius, and the medial bone in the forearm is called ulna. Both are the long bones. What about the hand? So at the hand, we actually can divide the hand region to these three parts. We have carpal region, which is actually the wrist part, carpals. Then the palm region is called metacarpal, which composed of metacarpal bones. And then the fingers actually composed of the 14 long bones, which called phalanges. So at the carpal region, or at the wrist region, we have 8 carpal bones, and then which they are short bones. The metacarpal region or the palm region is composed of 5 long bones, which each is called metacarpal bone. So for example, we are going to count from our thumb. So we have metacarpal number 1, metacarpal number 2, metacarpal number 3, metacarpal number 4, and then metacarpal number 5. Then each phalanges is composed of 1, 2, 3 bones, except our thumb, which is composed of 2 bones. And each bone is called phalanx as the singular and phalanges as the plural. Then each of these phalanx, based on their position, would be called as proximal phalanx, distal phalanx for our thumb, and then for the other, like fingers from 2 to 5, each is called proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and distal phalanx, based on their position, based on their, like, if they are close to the body or if they are far from the body. So as you remember, when we talked about the scapula, we said the scapula is going to be articulated with the head of the humerus. So if you look at the humerus here, you actually can see the bowl shape part of the humerus, which is actually the head of the humerus and would be articulated with the glenoid cavity of the scapula and make the shoulder joint. Yes, so here you can see these carpal bones, 8 carpal bones, 5 metacarpals, and then 14 phalanges, the bones of the fingers and thumb. Now let's talk about the pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle or hip girdle is actually consists of 2 bones, the right and left hip bones or coxal bone. So the pelvis actually is composed of the pelvic girdle plus sacrum and plus coccyx. So these bones together, they're gonna make our pelvis. So here you actually can see the anterior view of the pelvis. So what is the pelvis? Pelvis would be our right hip, left hip, sacrum plus coccyx. When we say pelvic girdle, it means the bones connecting our lower limb to the axial skeleton, which sacrum and coccyx are part of the axial skeleton, but the hip bones, which they are connecting our lower limb to the axial skeleton, are part of the appendicular skeleton. So one more time, whenever we're talking about the pelvic girdle, we're talking about these 2 hip bones. Whenever we're talking about the pelvis, it means 2 hip bones plus sacrum and plus coccyx. So this is important because actually the pelvic girdle or our pelvis is going to like bears the weight of the body and also protect the organs of the pelvic cavity, which means like the organ of our reproductive system, some organs of the urinary system, and also some organs of the digestive tract would be found in the pelvis or pelvic cavity. Then as you can see here, the 2 like hip bones anteriorly articulate together, and here we have a pubic symphysis. So pubic symphysis is a joint that this right and left hip bone articulate together here, and at the back each hip bone would articulate it with the sacrum and make this sacroiliac joint. So sacroiliac joint means the joint between the bone sacrum and the iliac, which means this is the ilium part of the hip bone. Let's continue with the coxal bones or hip bones. So, before puberty, each hip bones actually was three separate bones, which we had ilium, pubis, and ischium. And then they just fused together, and right now we have just one piece of the hip bone. But still we can define these parts for the hip bone. The ilium, which is the top part and the largest part of the hip bone. Pubis, which is the anterior and inferior part of the hip bone, and ischium, which is the posterior and inferior part of the hip bone. So here we have the top part, the superior part, and then the bottom would be the inferior part, right? And here we have the anterior and posterior. So ilium, top part, the largest one, pubis, anterior and inferior, and the ischium, posterior and inferior. So ischium actually is the part that you are sitting on it. And then pubis, as we mentioned here, this is the part of the hip bone articulate together at the anterior side and make the pubic symphysis joint. And one important bony marking of the hip bone that you have to know is this hip socket, or the cup-shaped part of the hip bone, which is called acetabulum. So acetabulum, you can actually kind of compare it with the glenoid cavity. So glenoid cavity is a cup-shaped part of the scapula which articulate with the head of the humerus, making the shoulder joint, and acetabulum is a cup-shaped part of the hip bone articulate with the head of femur and make the hip joint. Okay, and that's the part that these three parts, the ilium, ischium, and pubis, just fuse together here. Okay, now let's go over the lower limb. So again, as we divided our upper limb to the arm, forearm, and hand, here we are going to divide our lower limb to the thigh, leg, and foot. So at the thigh region, you can see only one bone, which is called femur. Then the leg part is actually composed of two bones. We have the medial one, tibia, and the lateral one is fibula. And then we have the foot, which composed of the tarsal bones, metatarsals, and phalanges. So if you compare it with the hand, in hand we said we have carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, but here we have tarsal, metatarsal, and phalanges. So then, as we mentioned just now, the head of the femur would articulate with the acetabulum of hip bone and making our hip joint. And then at the distal end, femur is going to make an articulation with the tibia. So here we actually have this bony marking, which is called condyle. So the condyle of femur, which we have medial and lateral condyle, articulate with medial and lateral condyle of tibia, and together they're gonna make the knee joint. And also do not forget the patella bone, the patella or kneecap bone, which would be involved in making our knee joint. It is a sesamoid bone. Sesamoid bone means the bone's gonna be found like inside of the tendon. So here, the thigh muscle, which is called quadriceps femoris muscle, make a tendon, which that tendon is gonna surround the patella bone. So again, the patella bone is a sesamoid bone and would be involved in making our knee joint. So it means our knee joint would be like the articulation between femur, tibia, and patella bone. So as you can see, our fibula is not involved. Okay, so then we actually talk about the tibia, which is the medial bone in our leg, which is a very thick bone. It's gonna like transfer the weight from our hip to the femur and from our femur to the tibia, and would be involved in making our knee joint and also an ankle joint. And one important bony marking of the tibia would be a bump that you can actually touch it on the medial part of your ankle. So this bump, the bony bump, is called medial malleolus. So medial malleolus would be found at the distal end of the tibia, and you can feel it on the medial aspect of your ankle. And then fibula, which is a long, slender, thin bone in your leg that you can find it on lateral side of your leg. It actually has a head, which this head on top part would articulate with tibia, but it doesn't make knee joint. And then the distal part of the fibula, you can actually kind of feel and touch this large bony bump here, which is actually called the lateral malleolus. So lateral malleolus is a bony bump on distal part of fibula, and medial malleolus is a bony bump at distal end of the tibia. Okay, related to the foot. So as we said, the hand composed of carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. And for foot, we are going to define tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So tarsal bone are the bones gonna be found in the ankle region. But here we have 7 tarsal bones. Each of them has their specific name, but these two are important, the talus bone and calcaneus bone. So calcaneus is actually our heel bone, and talus bone is the bone making the ankle joint by joining or articulation with tibia and fibula. So it means that our ankle joint is the articulation between these 3 bones, fibula, tibia, and talus. And then metatarsal bones are the 5 bones gonna be found actually in the sole part of the foot, and the phalanges are the bones of the toes, and exactly like the phalanges of the hand. So we have 2 phalanges, proximal and distal for the big toe, and the other toes they have 3 phalanges: proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and distal phalanx. Okay, that was a quick review of the appendicular skeleton that we need to know in our human biology course. And let's finish this part with one question. Do you remember which of the following is the part of the axial skeleton? Hopefully you know the correct answer. Just a quick review: the axial skeleton is the part making our skull, making our rib cage, and also making our vertebral column. And the appendicular skeleton is the part that's gonna be found in our upper limb, lower limb, and the bones connecting our lower limb and upper limb to the axial skeleton. Where you can find femur? In the thigh region, right? So that is not part of the axial skeleton. It is part of the appendicular skeleton. It is the long bone in the thigh region. Okay, then humerus. Do you remember where can we find humerus? Is the long bone of the arm. So it means the humerus is also part of the appendicular skeleton. How about the hip? Hip is the bone part of the pelvic girdle. Means that the bone connecting our lower limb to the axial skeleton. So that is also part of the appendicular skeleton. But if you remember, hyoid bone is the bone of the axial skeleton, gonna be found just under the mandible. It's not gonna be articulated with any other bones, but there are some ligaments and muscles which can be connected to the hyoid bone. So thank you so much for watching.